So this talk will be called What I Didn't Get at the Vue Meetup, or Vue Workshop. So before, this was supposed to be like a what I learned at the Vue Workshop talk, but then I realized that during the workshop I actually didn't get a lot of things. And so maybe you have these questions too that I had. Okay, so last month we had a workshop to learn Vue called New Year, New Vue, super clever. As a show of hands, who here was there for that? Cool, decent amount of people. So as a recap, during the workshop, the premise was to make a cat dress-up app, kind of similar to those like retro doll dress-up sites where you like drag and drop like accessories onto like dolls, I guess. So we were to create something to slide cat heads, shirts, and bottoms for the main cat. And this is what we ended up with. And I included a URL if you want to try to build it. These slides will also be available like afterwards if you actually wanted to try. Okay, so this is my background. As Tessa said, I'm primarily a backend developer. I've used AngularJS before, the one with components. So definitely used components before, but I've never used Vue. And because of that, I was the guinea pig for this workshop, basically. So a lot of these questions basically consisted of like Tessa and Justin running through the workshop with me the night before, and these were the questions I had. So I feel like a lot of workshops do this thing where like they're telling you about the setup and they say like, oh, don't worry about that yet because we want to get to like the punchline of what Vue does and stuff. So this talk will be mostly questions relating to that setup process. So in a nutshell, these were my questions. So the first one was about code sandbox. The second one was about this weird render syntax. And the third one was about single file components. Okay, so the first step was to go to codesandbox.com. And then I was like, oops, what is Code Sandbox? Right? And so Code Sandbox is actually what we use to create this project. It sets up our configuration, and it uses the Vue CLI template. So speaking of Vue CLI, we're giving away Manhattan.js tickets where Evan will be talking about Vue CLI 3. Right, so if you go to Vue Sandbox, you can choose to make a Vue project along with a lot of other different frameworks. And so Code Sandbox comes with all of your dependencies and file structures laid out. So it's super beginner friendly, especially if you don't know the setup process. So I asked Justin Zefraf what Code Sandbox really does, and he says that it creates a Vue environment. And another comment about how it sets up a complete Webpack build in your browser, which is nuts. And so, yeah. So in conclusion, Code Sandbox, nice for beginners and not only for Vue. And it's also nice for sharing code. Like if you have a bug in your branch or something and it's already pushed up to a repository, you can easily just like link that to Stack Overflow and be like, yo, what's up with this? Okay, so the next step was to go into the index.html. And I guess this is like where most of the confusion started, where it was then said that our app will be bound to the app ID div. So to go into the main.js, we should look into this Vue declaration. So right at the start, the app ID div is attached to this EL field. And so from the docs, the value from EL, or the value for EL is supposed to provide the Vue instance an existing element to mount on. And so we're trying to mount this Vue instance on the app div. So that made sense. But then this weird render syntax popped up. And I got kind of confused because from my Python background, the Zen of Python was all like, oh, explicit is over implicit or whatever. And so I was like, why are we using like something called like H? Right? So was it like the best practice or something? And so after looking into this, someone actually asked this in a Webpack simple issue. And this kid, Zhang, commented with some pretty useful stuff. I also linked the issue on the bottom. So he basically broke down what this function is actually saying without all the fat arrows. So H to H app is actually translates to a function that takes a function called createElement as an argument and then returns that function called on our Vue app. So this makes sense since, like, according to the docs, render is expected to receive a createElement function to create vnodes. And then I was like, but what are vnodes? And then vnode is actually a virtual node, which is part of virtual DOMs. So virtual DOMs comprise of vnodes. Okay, so as for why it's called H. So that commenter, Zhang, I think his name was, also linked to an issue where this question was asked in, not going to read that entire thing, where Evan commented that it comes from HyperScript. And so I was like, okay, so what is HyperScript? And so HyperScript is a way to create hypertext with JavaScript. So hypertext is actually the HT in HTML, which is pretty cool. So it seemed to be something that comes from JSX. So yeah, I guess it is best practices. So then we moved on to the app.vue file. And so this is, if you remember, this is a thing that we rendered from the main.js. And so this is where we were introduced to single file components. So usually single file components have one template tag, one script tag, and one or more style tags. And my next question was, okay, so how does like the browser know to interpret .vue files? And so in a nutshell, the answer to this is Webpack and Vue Loader. And I was like, whoa, what is Webpack and Vue Loader? So Webpack, let's actually dive into like the code a little bit. So Webpack config includes this one line to load .vue files with Vue Loader. And so what Webpack does is it takes a bunch of your modules where Webpack thinks that all of your files are kind of like modules like JavaScript, CSS, and converts them into like JavaScript, CSS, and etc. files. So the hope is that the JavaScript files that are made can just be src'd in the script tags. Okay, so back to the config file. So yeah, here you'll see the rule that, as I mentioned, it takes any Vue file and uses the Vue Loader on it. So zooming in on this. So it should use Vue Loader to build these modules. Webpack uses loaders to massage files in custom ways before outputting to the final bundle. So this is useful for like linters, or if you want to transpile like CoffeeScript modules or Sass into CSS. So yeah, that's basically only 3 of my probably a lot of questions I had going through my mind during the workshop. Hopefully this also maybe answers some of your questions or confusions that you had during the workshop as well. And yeah, any questions I may or may not be able to answer, but I will definitely be able to point you in the direction of someone who does.